to share very briefly on a topic that you see in the program there, Africa's Theological Education, Pilgrim in or Exile. Pilgrim in Exile or Pilgrim or Exile, very briefly. I was privileged to attend the Triennial General Assembly of our sister agency, the ACTEA Theological Association, ACTEA. The meeting was held from 26th to 30th September 2022 in Malaysia. And the theme of that consultation was the digital turn in theological education, impact, challenges, and opportunities. The participants addressed one critical question: shall the digital turn in theological education lead to a new kind of theological education, or is it just an upgrade of the old? There's one presenter by the name Ray Lemuel Crisaldo. He particularly provoked my thoughts about theological education in the contemporary world. Crisaldo is a Theological Education Commission coordinator for the World Evangelical Alliance. His presentation focused on the implications of COVID-19 on churches. He asked, "What do you feel about the online church?" It's a very simple question. What do you feel about the online church? And then he says there are three images that depict how Christians feel about the online church. And the images are Exile, Exodus, and Easter. And then he asked he provided questions. For Exile, he asked, is the online church a tragic captivity of God's people that we have to endure but hopefully leave behind soon? And for Exodus, he asked, is the massive move to online spaces the happy liberation that God's people have been waiting for? And for Easter, he asked the following question: is online church a moment where the frail and beaten body of the church of old being raised anew? So in other words, is the church being resurrected in this moment of COVID? So Exile, Exodus, and Easter are powerful motifs that could be mined for ecclesiology and for theological education. My former professor argues in one of his books, The Church in Exile, that the motif of exile offers one of the most provocative and potentially fruitful ways for the church to define itself in this particular moment. You cannot be in exile and remain the same again. People in exile must think afresh. They must imagine how to survive or thrive in new ways, new spaces, new realities, hostile neighbors, new practices, and new ways to articulate their faith. Exiles are pilgrims or become pilgrims. Pilgrims are in a way in exile. Exiles find themselves on pilgrimage born out of necessity. Exiles, like pilgrims, often confront unknown and negative and familiar terrain. Both leave comfort zones. Both search for something greater out there. Both must adapt to new realities. Both must seek to connect with their new realities and reconnect with the homes they left behind. Both must constantly discover new ways of becoming who they need to be in light of present realities. Moses Audi, and I warned him, I told him, you made it into my short speech. Moses Audi is here, president of Baptist Theological Seminary, Kaduna, in Nigeria. He writes in his book that he gave me about 2 years ago, The Church as Pilgrim People, a Pilgrim Community. He notes that pilgrim consciousness this is not a direct quotation, is essential not only for the mission of the church, but also for theological institutions that need to develop theological programs that speak to the realities of pilgrims. Those are nomads, displaced people, and refugees. Theological education is not only serving pilgrims, and I think it should serve pilgrims. And in the case of Moses Audi, he's talking about nomads, displaced people, and refugees, and others. Theological education is not only serving pilgrims, but is also on a pilgrimage, discovering itself in the context of new challenges in the world. It constantly reinvents to stay relevant and alive to God's mission. In that regard, theological education is a restless sojourner, sustained by the hope of finding rest in a God-defined home. Theological education is a pilgrimage, a transformative voyage of self-discovery, innovation, adventure, and a spiritual quest. Theological education is prayerfully yielding to the Spirit in humility. In humility, we are willing to listen. Listen to this, my brothers and sisters. In humility, we are willing to listen, to be questioned, to question, to imagine, and to be displaced from our comfort zones. The Cameroonian theologian Jean Makela challenged us in My Faith as an African, published in 1988, that we, and I quote, must return to our people, becoming their companions in life and their traveling partners, end of quote. So to what are we returning to? We return, according to Jean Makela, to our people. We want to understand the context, to enter genuinely into African life and root ourselves there. Professor Emiola Nihilola, I did not warn you that you made it into my short speech. He invites us to do theology under the mango tree. That's the title of his book on systematic theology. To do theology under the mango tree. What kind of theology is that? Reverend Thomas Oduro writes in the foreword to that book that it is a theology spiced with African culture, worldview, philosophies, and personalities, end of quote. So this traveling is not a traveling alone, and that's now the reason we are here. We are traveling, we are on a sojourn together. This traveling is not a traveling alone. It is a pilgrimage with others in shared wisdom. Live together. The era of silos, ivory towers, intellectual pride, I know it all mentality is gone. The theological education of the future demands collaboration and partnerships. Partnership not only with like-minded institutions, but also with practitioners, churches, different disciplines, community leaders, and others. To institutional generosity, never before seen. It calls us to cross boundaries. Okay, I'm going to wait. All right. So it invites us to cross boundaries, to leave our comfort zones, zones of security and safety, and to venture into spaces never thought we could reach. It invites us to hold each other's hands as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Many of us, institutional leaders, feel like our institutions are at the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm not an Old Testament scholar, I don't know what that means, but you figure out. We feel like we are in exile because of unfriendly political environments, unstable governments, cities and villages ravaged by poverty, and institutions struggling to survive. We are trying to innovate, but we have mixed feelings about new ways of education. We feel isolated, disrupted, and alone in the wilderness. We long for that exodus, a movement from the past, a pilgrimage to a glorious future full of possibilities amid new challenges and opportunities. I see the challenges as opportunities, and that's why, in my opinion, I think we are living in really exciting times. A time of seismic shifts in education where traditional education is being challenged to its core. Those are really exciting times. I'm glad I'm alive when the way I've been doing theological education is being questioned. A time of distance education boom and the possibility of a campus-free future. I'm quoting some quotations here. Mark Ayers from, Wesley Seminary says the future is campus-free. A time of borderless and timeless learning, where education takes place in digital Babylon, an always-on, hyperlinked, immersive culture, as the Banner Group said a few years ago. A time when your typical student is not a recent high school graduate, but an older, married, employed adult who is not necessarily looking for a full-time Christian ministry, but to serve God in different areas of ministry in the marketplace. These are exciting times. A time saturated by a culture of freelancing and multi-careering. A time when people have access to information. They have access to information they want, when they want, for the price they want, they're willing to pay. A time of virtual tools, such as artificial intelligence, such as ChatGPT, and so many others. A time when theological institutions look for contextually relevant remedies to financial challenges. Why? Because, as Professor Emmanuel Bellon, who is Vice President of Scholar Leaders, he says, and I quote, "The carcasses of struggling institutions litter every corner of the continent." These are exciting times. A time when churches and communities are tired of polished academic graduates and are now looking for faithful lay leaders willing to invest in discipleship or formation of Christ-like disciples. Churches and communities are tired of polished academic graduates and are now looking for faithful lay leaders. What does that mean for you? A time when churches, institutions, and parachurch entities are more aware of the dangers of mission drift, seductive liberal ethos, and secularistic bents, and thus running and transitioning to university status is not going to excite many people. I'm talking to theological institutions who think they have to transition to university status, and it is going to be hallelujah. People will be like, what about mission drift? A time when churches and communities are calling for a more relevant, contextual, and balanced curriculum. A curriculum that takes the needs of poor villagers, slum dwellers, internally displaced persons, and refugees seriously. A curriculum that speaks to world concerns such as environmental degradation, broken families, modern-day slavery, human trafficking, sexual abuse, religious extremism, political upheavals, decaying infrastructure, and health concerns. A time when churches and communities are calling for pastors and leaders who can address contemporary challenges such as poverty, corruption, injustice, tribal conflicts, the health crises, and extremism. A time when we need competent executives and boards who understand leadership and governance and are willing to invest in lifelong learning. A time when people are calling for holistic education that embraces a broader vision of humanity in its comprehensive nature. An education that trains the mind, transforms the heart and provides vocational competencies is the education that people are just calling for. A time when stakeholders are begging their institutions to clarify their mission and to be faithful to that mission. This means people are tired with institutions that only exist for the sake of existing. People are tired of schools that have no clue to why they exist. People are tired with institutions that do not make a difference where they are located. So I'm so glad the Lord has chosen me as a theological leader to be part of innovative solutions to address these exciting concerns. For me, they don't scare me so much. I think those are just exciting, really exciting times. So as we plan the footsteps before us this week, these are our goals for our inaugural General Assembly and consultation. To assess the current state and prospects of African theological education from the Lusophone, the Francophone, and the Anglophone regions. To learn how to develop appropriately contextual theological curricula. To recognize the role of theological education in the church's response to contemporary concerns. And some of those concerns would be laid bare. We have presenters presenting about human trafficking, marriage and family, talking about issues of modern day slavery, religious extremism. All those concerns, the curriculum should speak to those issues. We are here to try to find ways to center the imperatives of spiritual formation in our theological education curricula. To even understand theological education as formation. To explore opportunities for theological education in online education, in partnering with efforts in non-formal theological education, and in competency-based education. We hope to grow beyond our training as theologians and educators into the administrative roles of leading theological institutions. We hope to renew our commitment to solid theological education that is thoroughly theological, thoroughly African, thoroughly academic, and thoroughly formative. May the Lord hold our hands and guide us on this pilgrimage. Amen. Glory be to God.